Welcome to Flat Earth Debate Live. I'm your host Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon and join button if you'd like to become a Nathan Oakley 1980 channel member and keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you would like to support the channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live. There's also a PayPal, Patreon and crypto link in the info box below this video. Also below this video is a link to get £50 for swapping your energy supplier to Octopus Energy. Most importantly, if you'd like to join the discussion, simply mute the page you are currently watching, then click the link in the info box below this video to join the panel and express your views on the nature of Earth. If you do join, please don't swear. If you do, you'll be ejected, and if you are, please don't try to rejoin the stream using sock accounts. You'll be warmly welcomed back on the next stream. Please also share the show on social media. Sharing the show obviously increases the live audience, but this in turn increases the chances of a more diverse panel, so please share the show on Facebook and Twitter. One last time, if you're new to the channel or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon and join button to keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. Now, we are joined by Arwin, Chocolate Saiyan, 10th Man, Flatzoid, Neil, Paul, and a whole bunch of people in Discord. So welcome, one and all.
Hello, hello.
Arriba!
Morning.
Hello! Hello!
That enthusiasm comes courtesy of Burn Fat till your stomach is as flat as the earth. Very good to have you, my friend.
Good to be here, thanks.
Excellent stuff. Hopefully you'll help us out with a bit of housekeeping. Any evidence of a physical geometric sphere edge? That's a horizon, formerly known as Earth curvature.
Not since the Black Swan. Or before Alberoni.
That's a pretty big timescale.
Was there ever a geometric horizon though?
No, it was reified into existence by necessity of people who wanted a model to be real.
Yeah,
If there was a geometric horizon, we wouldn't be getting told now that why would you expect to see the geometric horizon? The geometric horizon is the horizon you can't see, and it only exists in the math.
Spot on. There was a geometric physical sphere edge for a horizon. We'd live on a sphere. There is not a physical geometric sphere edge horizon. That apparent location where the sky meets the ground isn't physical. It's not a sphere edge. It's not capable of blocking boats and buildings. It's a not actual position that you can't measure. But they've measured it and reified it into physical existence as a sphere edge. We've debunked it with the Black Swan.
So since this is a physics site, maybe they can go to a math forum and find it.
I don't care about that. Neither should anybody
Well,
watching.
maybe some other Glover can come and tell us how we're forgetting about optics.
Well, we're forgetting the argument we put to them when they asserted the only reason things get blocked by way of a feet and inches value at the horizon was because of Earth curve, and we told them no, it's merely optics. They're telling us we should realise optics. Is that right, Chocolate?
Yep.
Terrestrial refraction optics.
You don't remember? Unorthodox showed up here and told Nathan, you forgot about optics, man.
Of course, it slipped my mind when we say perspective and talk about the begging the question proof of nothing perspective hijacking Earth curve maths that doesn't include optics. Yeah, we forgot all about that, didn't we? My bad.
Yep.
Well, nobody claims the horizon is Earth curve anyway.
Talking of things nobody
They
claims.
do. They definitely do.
Talking of things that people never claim. Any evidence of axial rotation of the Earth-based variety?
Come on, Bird Fat.
Things displacing slightly when they move vertically, but not horizontally.
That doesn't happen in nature. Doesn't happen.
Funny thing about that, Neil deGrasse Tyson says it does move, and the atmosphere moves separate to it. New video I'm making, you'll see.
That would give
So
us
when
the
they come and
Coriolis
say
effect.
atmosphere moves with it, you can just point them to Neil deGrasse Tyson again.
What you're
Damn
detailing
you,
is
Neil, you freaking gas pressure separatist.
what
That's why
these
he's
two are now
under the bus.
detailing is the problem that the fundamentalist religious zealots on the globe side, who have a belief that we spin, hold two positions at the same time. They hold the position that we have a 15 degrees an hour drift as Earth turns underneath to give us this effect called Coriolis. They also hold it at the same time that we don't see any drift because Earth and atmosphere are assumed to be turning together, giving you no drift. So the claim is we can prove Earth spinning, we've got 15 degrees an hour drift, that's Coriolis effect. But when we point out that it doesn't happen, they challenge us to prove that the globe even claims it. Because how would we ever want to assume that Earth's turning underneath? Well, we wouldn't, but that's what the globe claims. And it just doesn't happen. The two positions have to be held by our opponents simultaneously. AKA,
Selective drift.
I'm nearly there, guys.
Why
God,
Neil
hello.
deGrasse
Trying to do a plug for me on the show. That's why I'm stopping you. Normally I'd let you. So, cognitive dissonance in regards to Coriolis, holding both positions simultaneously, which cannot be done. It's a contradiction. You can't both have drift and not drift at the same time. And that cognitive dissonance is summarised on the show coming out from yesterday, which is the Uncut and After show, on my second channel. So subscribe today to my second channel. Also, the premiering stream, which comes out at 9 PM UK time tonight, has now got a trailer attached to it. So I've gone to the effort, it took me about an hour, to actually trim out part of the show, 3 minutes long, and put that onto the premiering stream. So it's a new facility that YouTube have offered to YouTubers that if you've got a live, I don't know if it's live, just premiering maybe. If you've got a premiering stream at the very least, you can attach a trailer to it. So that when you click on it, and it used to just be the thumbnail and the chat with no one in it, now it's instead of the thumbnail, it's a trailer. So you can actually watch that. It's 13:44, yesterday's Uncut and After show, which comes out the following day on my second channel. If you didn't know that, subscribe today to Nathan Oakley and check out the trailer. So it's 13:44, and it's got this particular guest who's describing exactly that, telling me how we have 15 degrees an hour drift by way of assumption, and then when asked to detail why it would happen in nature, he objects to us even asserting that Earth claims they've got Coriolis effect. That'd be Earth turning underneath stuff at 15 degrees an hour. So check out that cognitive dissonance laden show. It's an extended show, and it comes out at 9 PM on my second channel today. Don't normally plug my own shows, but it was a particularly eventful show highlighting that cognitive dissonance. Sorry, Arwin or Tenth or whoever it was, Chocolate, I think.
No, I was just going to say that I understand why Neil deGrasse Tyson seems to be so upset when flat Earth is brought up, because the reason why they've thrown him under the bus, the globe side I'm talking about, is because they have to actually argue these points now, because we're here asking questions. We're debating this topic. If nobody was debating this, then Neil deGrasse could just have the freedom to run around and just say whatever he wants, touting this crap to the masses, and that would be it. But now, because some of these cats have been put in a position, or they put themselves in the position to have to defend this shit, and in order for them to defend it, they have to actually go completely against the very narrative that they're defending. That's why Neil deGrasse is all under the bus, under the tires. They call him sloppy. They even expect him to apologize for saying things like, "Oh, we can't see the horizon at 128,000 feet." I mean, this is the globe side. They've abandoned him for this, and it's because of us asking questions.
Yeah, and when it comes to the point that we disprove the claims that are being made by the globe and by their priests, which they should adhere to but don't make sense in physical reality, they throw the priest under the bus. Or ask us why we would assume that we've got Earth turning underneath at 15 degrees an hour to give Coriolis effect. Get us to cite their own claims, and often it'll be someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson. You go, here you go. Here's Neil deGrasse Tyson saying that Earth turns underneath a football so that a field goal can be made. Well, that drift is Coriolis effect. When you observe it seeming to drift through the goal from the stands, that's you observing something from a non-inertial, claimed to be spinning reference frame that's Earth. And as the ball leaves that claimed to be spinning non-inertial reference frame, it's claimed that you from the stands, as you turn underneath the ball, see it drift. Not because it's actually drifting, because you're turning underneath it on a spinning Earth. That's supposed to be the proof we spin. However, we ask anybody to actually show us occurring in nature, and they can't direct us to any example of Coriolis effect in nature. Now, examples that might have had the wind blowing the ball and Neil deGrasse saying, well, that's Earth turning underneath it, that is, ends up with the opponents at the trench level saying, nobody claims that Earth's turning underneath. Why would you get such a crazy notion that that's what we're claiming? Because they're under the misapprehension that somehow Earth turning and atmosphere being dragged along with it to cause hurricanes is Coriolis effect, when in reality Coriolis effect is you spinning underneath something, watching it seem to do something it isn't, merely because you're turning underneath it. So hurricanes, nothing to do with Coriolis, unless you're in the hurricane spinning around, watching things on the ground seem to come towards you. They aren't anything to do with Coriolis, but because there's so much propaganda and misinformation about Coriolis effect in relation to Earth and its spinning, because it doesn't happen. We don't see anything drifting. Nothing's drifting at 15 degrees now, so they have to convolute and misdirect anybody who looks into the subject. Coriolis is really simple. You on a roundabout spinning, you throw something off it. Now, the thing you throw off travels straight, but because you still spin, it looks like it curves. Well, that's supposed to happen on Earth, i.e. something leaves Earth and looks like it curves because you carry on rotating underneath stuff. But you'd actually have to observe that happening to claim it's an effect, and they can't show it happening. They give occasional examples like bullets and footballs where they're only in the air for a couple of seconds. So they don't get enough opportunity to say, well, what happens if it's in the air for a long time, like an aeroplane? We get the rebuttal, we wouldn't claim Earth's turning under an aeroplane, like it turns under a football and a sniper's bullet that's only in the air for a couple of seconds, only for us to relinquish that claim when you point out it doesn't happen. Because Earth isn't turning underneath anything. There is no Coriolis deviation.
Chocolate. I look at Neil deGrasse Tyson a little bit different. He's more of a pop culture personality. I mean, you see him in videos dancing and doing all this different crazy stuff. And he says stuff that gets the ballers mad. But then in contrast, you got a George Musser, who was with Scientific America, and he says gravity's not a force. And so now you probably be hard pressed to find a video of him dropping a mic or dancing, because one likes attention, one is just more of a scientific kind of a guy. But they both throw the ballers under the bus, don't they?
No, the
Yeah.
ballers throw themselves under the
and-
bus when we point out that the claim from the priesthood, that would be a claim from Musser or deGrasse Tyson, does not happen in reality. Then they tell us, no, the priest who said it should happen in reality, and you've just proven wrong, he's wrong, because it shouldn't happen in reality. For example, they tell us, you and your reference frames are ruined. That's Simon Dan telling me, a flat earther, that the reference frames used to claim Earth is turning underneath at 15 degrees an hour to cause Coriolis effect, they're ruined according to him. Well, why would he tell me that a reference frame I don't use to claim Earth spins is ruined? Well, because we don't observe the effect in nature. He, that Simon Dan, knows damn well he doesn't observe the effect in nature, and will show us examples of men on trampolines not drifting, not displaying Coriolis effect. Why? Well, because it doesn't happen in nature, even though deGrasse Tyson claims it does, because the globe claims it does. Just doesn't happen. We don't have Coriolis, nothing's turning underneath anything. We're not seeing 15 degrees an hour drift. There is no reference frames with a deviation, and Simon Dan knows it enough to tell me that he thinks my claim of reference frames? No, that's just Coriolis effect, claimed to happen on a spinning Earth. We show it doesn't. Simon Dan tells me my reference frames, aka the claim that the globe has two of them to show drift, are ruined. Yeah, it just doesn't happen in nature. That's all he actually means. He's just too stupid to understand what Coriolis actually is. Otherwise, he wouldn't be telling me something the globe claims has got their reference frames ruined.
That's the same thing with George Musser, right? We spent 2 years telling these guys that gravity is not a force. Your own side tells you that. So they went so far as to get somebody who writes for Scientific American, right? Real well respected, Mr. George Musser, and he comes out and affirms our position. It's not a force. Tells you that blatantly, right? And they still go out of their way to tell us how he's wrong. It's insane. I don't understand how they how they fix that in their own minds. It's I don't know, some type of delusion.
We can't help with that. What we can do is point out to our audience where this argument starts and ends. Any scientific evidence of gravity?
George Musser, gravity's not a force, but you can
Not
think
not
of
at
it
the
as a force.
not at the really is level.
Wouldn't you first have to observe it to be able to have a hypothesis, so you can be able to test it, to actually validate it and make it scientific?
Yeah, first natural phenomena. What are we observing again? Oh, that would be bending of force space, a conceptual medium where time and space get bent by the uneven distribution of maths described mathematically.
So we've got Newton saying, don't describe it to me. And we got Musser saying it's not a force. And we got the rest of the ballers mad.
Yeah, the only reason they get mad is because they don't have any force to hold gas pressure next to the Earth in their atmospheric law. which refers to gravity. So when they beg the question that sphere-shaped air is somehow a thing, with atmo, that's air, sphere, a shape, well, that doesn't apply until we point out that they don't have the gravity they appeal to in that atmosphere law. It's not a force.
Yeah, they're up a creek with no paddle.
Hello, Sleeping Warrior.
Yo, yo, yo. I do have a claim for gravity according to a flirter.
Okay.
Can you see my screen, Nathan? Can you present?
Yeah. Carry on.
So, Fight the Flat Earth claims to Flatzoid. And I want to go through these because I think that they're worth mentioning, because if these are what the blurters are telling their own audience is science and experiments, we want to be aware of them, because like some of them you might be aware of, others you might not be. So he's asked, Fight the Flat Earth says, proving me right again. Did you enjoy my citation that ruined you? Where's the 11 frames, Flatzoid? I'm not sure what that's about, but doesn't matter. He responds and says, 5 experiments that follow the scientific method for gravity. Now, number 1, he claims that Cavendish is following the scientific method for gravity. Should we pull that apart for why it's not, Nathan, or should we do the first 5 and then come back to them in turn?
I can rattle through them as you do them. There's no natural phenomena. It's conjured within the apparatus.
There's no manipulated independent variable either. It's
Correct.
correlative.
If mass, then mass
And
attracts
gravity-
mass is the
it's not
hypothesis.
about gravity. How about that?
Let's just rattle through them. If mass, then mass attracts mass. A begging the question fallacy on steroids with no natural phenomena or capable of being manipulated independent variable. Not an experiment.
Yeah. So there's no
Not
manipulated
even, not
independent
even the
variable.
current rhetoric.
I was
Not
going to
even
say,
current
it's not
rhetoric.
I was going to say that's not even the current position in science, is it? Obviously, mass doesn't attract mass. We know it's not a force. So he's claiming that Cavendish follows the scientific method, and obviously it's the wrong current position in science anyway. This one underneath him,
Hold on, just before you move on.
Helion.
Just before you move on. Did you say this is Craig, Fight the Flat Earth?
Yeah,
He
that's
spoke
what he's
to
telling his audience.
He spoke to a person called George Musa. We discussed him just before you got here. And to quote him, literally, it's not a force. That was directed at Craig, a quote by George Musa, when being interviewed by Craig. Literally, it's not a force.
So this goes back to a video that I cited from John. John told me about, well, there was quite a few actually. I'd picked up Gravity sometime before it, and John had pointed out this Scientific American article from George Musa. And I'd cited it, and for some reason Craig had picked me up on it and wanted to attack the claim that I was making, the citation that I was relying on that was George Musa. And he spent a whole week doing hate videos against me, right? And, you know, I've made my mistakes in the past. We all have. We're all learning this stuff, right? But to try and discredit me because it was such a volatile topic, he spent a whole week doing hate videos, right? Which I thought was quite a compliment, to be honest, but I didn't actually watch any of them at any point because there's nothing in them. No science in them anyway. But when he got George Musa on, George Musa said 2 key devastating blows, but he said them in such a way that Craig didn't even realize that he was disagreeing with him because it was so affable and so professional. Craig thought he was actually agreeing with Craig, even though he's telling him the opposite. And it was beautiful. It's poetry. It was that good. It's difficult to detect. But nonetheless, his first one, and I'll get Chocolate to cite the second one, but his first one was gravity is not really a force, but we can think of it as a force. Well, if it's not a force and you think of it as a force, then it's still not acting on matter. So it's not explaining why things fall down or why helium balloons fall up. It's not explaining why the atmosphere is being held to the earth by gravity. It's not explaining any of that because it's not interacting with matter. Chocolate, do you want to do the other one, the second one that you always do?
We can, we do, we must consider Newtonian gravity as a force. It doesn't mean it really is one, but we don't necessarily have to work at the really is level. George
Now,
Musa.
that's brilliant. Now, Craig didn't realize that he was disagreeing with him. He thought that because he said it in such a polite way and he didn't call him a retard, he thought that he was on his side, but he was actually correcting him. And it's poetry now that he's citing the Cavendish experiment for 5 experiments that follow scientific method. Because not only does he not understand scientific method, he also knows that Cavendish isn't even the current physics, yet he's telling that to his audience. It's like, hello? Now, the second one, this I don't even know how you pronounce this, but Helion apparently is to do with a pendulum swinging next to a mountain. Now, this is, I mean, when do you ever see pendulums being affected by mountains? But this is,
That's
he
not a
claims,
natural
is
phenomenon.
complying.
Oh, sorry. I assume that was the break to give an answer to a rhetorical question. That's not a naturally occurring phenomena that we observe now, is it?
I've never seen anything get attracted to mountains.
Well, take me to your naturally occurring pendulum first and foremost.
Yeah. But this is what he thinks is scientific experiments that comply with scientific method. It's absolutely outrageous. And he claims that he's got a degree in physics, but is citing stuff that is gimmickry at best. Otherwise, so what? So you think that the pendulum does something with mountains? Does that demonstrate gravity? Or does it demonstrate that there might be some kind of air current nearby the mountain caused by the mountain that's affecting these things? Perhaps. Who knows? But again, there's no isolated independent variable manipulation to prove the effect that he believes is observing, which we don't even see in the real world anyway. So it's like, well, how is that complying with scientific method? It clearly isn't. And then we've got, this is brilliant, Eddington, right? The Eddington, they call it the Eddington experiment because they claim it proves Einstein to be correct. The Eddington experiment is actually an observation, right? There's no experiment there performed at all. It was just observation of a star that was supposed to be blocked out by the sun or the moon or both during a solar eclipse. And the claim was that if they could see the star, because the light bent round the sun from the observer's perspective, then it proves Einstein was correct. Who cares whether it proves Einstein was correct? He's arguing a totally different concept of gravity that he thinks followed scientific method. Well, there was no manipulation of anything. There's no dependent variable. There's no hypothesis. There's nothing. Yet he claims it. It's outrageous. Anybody want to add to that?
You've summed it up beautifully, I think. You've got to have naturally occurring phenomena.
The Pound-Rebka test was a group of university students that were doing drop tests from a tall building, and they were measuring how much deviation there was in the path of falling from where they dropped it to where it ended up. And basically they got different results each time. And it's an interesting thought. It's like, okay, so where's the dependent variable on this then? What do we see drops that ever, like, do we ever drop anything off something and see that the earth rotates underneath it? And therefore that's the reason why it doesn't land where it should land. Does that ever happen anywhere?
I'm going to just take 2 points from that, just because it was discussed in yesterday's show and because it's relevant to what's being discussed. So there's two different things, two different issues with what you're claiming. You can take it either way. In this first instance, we're going to take it that we assume the example given is correct. Now, if the example is given is correct, that would be to say Earth turns underneath the dropped item to cause it to deflect, drop in a slightly different position from where it was dropped from, not directly beneath it. And it's claimed that is proving Earth is turning underneath the item that's dropped. That's the claim. That's Coriolis deflection. Well, that Coriolis deflection, which is, let's say, 1/4 of an inch over a, I don't know how tall, 200 foot, who cares, tower, it's dropping for a second. You know, a very short period of time. And it's claimed Earth turns underneath it. Well, if Earth turns underneath something that's not attached as it falls through the air, then an aeroplane also has the Earth turn underneath as it travels through the air. Exactly as asserted by Neil deGrasse Tyson when he asserts that a football deviates as it leaves the spinning reference frame of a turning Earth. That's Coriolis effect. Now, if we accept, as I am in this example, that we have Coriolis deviation, based on this claim to be experiment, actually pseudoscience, because there's no natural phenomena, we'll get to that as the second point, then we would have shortened flight times. A flight from Charlotte, North Carolina to Los Angeles would take 1.5 hours if Earth was turning underneath it. And it takes 4.5 hours, because Earth isn't turning underneath it. There is no deflection, which would be exaggerated in an aeroplane that's in the air, not attached to the ground, for a prolonged period of time. The second way you can argue this is the route. I've left it second.
Me.
Well, I know that you're leading on to this. So yes, is that there is no naturally occurring phenomena in this example if it's claimed to be an experiment. That would be to say, where do we actually observe in nature things drifting? And there is no examples. There's man-made pseudoscience examples like this one with contrary results and, you know, or pendulums or gyros. They're never a natural phenomena. We don't observe drift in nature. And when we point that out, we're charged with our by our opponents with proving that the Earth claims it's turning underneath at 15 degrees an hour. Feel free, Anthony, to continue.
Well, I was just going to ask, is this an example of apparent deflection that he claims, or is it an example of actual deflection? Because isn't there a bit of a distinction between the two?
Yes and no. So the deflection observed is appearing but not actual. And what that means, if I give you an example with a drone on a roundabout, the drone can hover above the roundabout. And you can spin underneath it and watch it appear to come towards you and go away, come towards you and go away, come towards you and go away. As you spin underneath it, now that is because it's not actually moving towards you and going away from you, it's merely hovering. So the deflection you're observing, apparent, appearing, but not actual, is the fact that you're turning underneath it to cause that motion to appear to you. That's why it's apparent. Now, in terms of its physicality, if the drone was at the same level as your head, on the same plane, it's a very real possibility that as you rotate towards the drone, you could smack into it. So it's very much a real effect, in the same way as if it was occurring on Earth. You launch your drone on the equator, it hovers, but you, on a spinning Earth, turn away from it at 1,000 miles an hour. So in reality, how that would manifest is, oh my God, my drone's going away at 1,000 miles an hour. Not because it can fly at 1,000 miles an hour. That's where the apparent bit comes in. Drones don't fly at 1,000 miles an hour, but it's claimed Earth can turn underneath them at 1,000 miles an hour. But that just doesn't happen. So it's apparent because the drone isn't actually flying at 1,000 miles an hour. It's claimed Earth turns underneath it, the same as my roundabout turns underneath the drone that's hovering. So that's where you get the apparent effect.
So basically, none of these so far, these top four, are not scientifically valid, complying with scientific method examples as claimed. Now, this fifth one is a really good one. The discovery of Neptune. Now, for those that don't know the story, they noticed in one of the orbits of, was it Uranus or Uranus, whatever you want to pronounce it? It had a weird orbital pattern, and they couldn't really account for it. And somebody said, well, maybe there's another planet around here somewhere that might account for the perturbations or whatever that we're seeing that don't seem to follow the normal orbital pattern. And then all of a sudden they discovered Neptune was there. So you can interpret it two ways. They'd already spotted it and then fitted it in to make it a lovely just so story. Or it was genuine because gravity is a force. But we know gravity is not a force. So it couldn't have been that they anticipated that Neptune was discovered, because that relies on gravity being a force, which Einstein said it wasn't. So you're left with the just so story that somebody spotted a pattern. They already knew about Neptune, but they wanted to link it to Einstein so that it could be better explained and give more credibility to Einstein. That's the only interpretations that I can see. What do you think, Nathan?
Yeah, it's total nonsense. Everything about this is assuming distances are worked out by way of Christian Huygens' assumption of Venus being the same size. The observation within the heliocentric model is still going to take the assumption and begging the question fallacy of orbits, is it not?
Yeah, but I still can't see the science in any of this.
Yeah, this isn't science. That's Anthony's point, really. I should have just said yes. No science. Just a quick...
Let me just conclude.
Hold on, let Anthony conclude.
For a second, sorry. Excuse me?
Well, I just wanted to conclude with this last point. He says thermodynamic systems are strictly defined, but in physics, the practicality isn't so simple. Really? Earth is considered a closed system. Yeah, that means rockets can't go to the moon, doesn't it? Because if rockets can leave, then it's not a closed system, is it? If gas pressure doesn't immediately evacuate into the vacuum, the low pressure system that we call a vacuum, then it's not an open system, is it? If it can do that, it means that it's an open system. But Earth, it doesn't do that in the real world. So which way round is it? Is Earth considered a closed system and therefore rockets can't go to the moon and gas pressure can then be contained? Or is it an open system, in which case rockets can go to the moon, but we don't have any gas pressure to breathe?
Well, this is another example of cognitive dissonance amongst our opponents. So they need to have it both ways, so they have to hold both positions simultaneously with an open-closed system, a contradiction in terms of married bachelor, if you will. So they have an open system. That's the bottom line. Earth is claimed to be an open system with a sky vacuum, where men can travel through that sky vacuum after leaving the gas pressure that we have without containment. Well, that's open. The problem being that it violates natural law. Now, when we
And
point out that it violates
he can't call it an open system because he knows that, so he has to call it in a closed system. And
Exactly.
Flatzoid's damn right to point that out and laugh at him because it is a closed system of some kind. Doesn't mean it's a dome. It doesn't mean that we know what it is made of, but it does mean that we can demonstrate that all. See, this is the thing. There are no experiments that demonstrate that gas pressure can coexist next to a vacuum without immediate dispersal into it. Right? All experiments demonstrate immediate, sudden and violent in cases evacuation. We've seen the tanker implode, so that doesn't prove that there's a dome or a container, but it does prove that you can't have gas pressure next to a vacuum. So we don't need to prove what it's made of or what it is, but we can demonstrate that their claim is false.
You know what it also shows me? It shows me how little confidence they have in this gravity nonsense. Because if they had all this confidence in this gravity bullshit, then they'd have no problem saying, well, it's an open system. But because we have gravity, we have air pressure, right?
Yeah.
But because they know that this gravity is so silly that they have to say it's closed, because obviously you need a closed system to maintain the air. But they have to say it's open because they've already told them that people have left and machines have left and all this bullshit.
Well, they
It's
do say
crazy.
that, Chocolate.
It's nonsense.
They do say that. They just don't say air pressure. They say atmosphere. And atmosphere has part of its description, although they call it a law, that you've got a gravity force holding it here, and they describe it as such. So they appeal to that as their container, i.e. sphere-shaped air law.
So just last line and then I'll pass it on.
Which is insanity. That's why I didn't say that. I said air pressure.
And you're right to.
So last line and then I'll pass it on. So the 5 cited experiments that are claimed to follow scientific method for gravity. I don't know how the Pound-Rebka one is an argument for gravity, but nonetheless, the point is this. None of them are complying with scientific method, but that's what the blurthers are being told by the priests, like in Fight the Flat Earth priest. That's what they're telling them. And it's like, they can't get past any of this, but that's the reason why they can't come in this show, because they know that none of it is science. They've got to brainwash their own audience with their own bullshit, their own convenient bullshit pseudoscience, because they know that it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. So they have to be protected by keeping away. That's the reason why they don't come in. I'm done.
Anybody got anything to add before I ask for any single viable hypothesis from any of the fields of astronomy, cosmology, or astrophysics? And indeed, I'll shout out James Richard. I might as well do that now, actually. The measurements of Earth curvature. Who has stretched the line upon the Earth? ? We don't need a tangent, just sticks and shadows. Thanks, James Richard, for the super chat.
I'd like to go back to the ball that he dropped. It said it deviated a quarter of an inch. And I want to beg the question just for a second. Well, if his argument is sound, then not just things descending towards the Earth, but ascending away from the Earth should also deviate because of the, because it's rotating underneath. So even if whether you're going north, south, east, or west, it doesn't matter. As soon as you start ascending upwards, whether balloon, drone, or helicopter, the Earth should also deviate under those things.
That's correct.
Does the Earth deviate under ascending objects as well?
It's velocity that the Earth is retaining. So they violate the first law. They're gaining energy from nowhere. It's like, no, it won't. It'll just have drift that we'd see and we don't.
So yeah, so if it keeps up with the Earth, that means it has to be gaining energy from somewhere. So if it's not deviating, it stays with the Earth, it has to be gaining energy. So I agree. Of course, Now you say, well, I can't talk very much.
Yeah, that's fine. We heard enough. That's the first law of thermodynamics violation. That's correct. So, any single viable hypothesis from any of the fields of astronomy, cosmology, or astrophysics?
No, as the 5 experiments claims that we just talked about demonstrate, a lot of these are astrology and observation only. And because they're observation only, there's no actual experiment. To quote, what's his name? I can't remember his name. Max Planck, he says, experiment is the only means of knowledge at our disposal. Everything else is just poetry, imagination. It's probably the best quote you'll ever get, because you need the experiment, and observations alone are nothing. They don't prove anything.
They could be considered mind experiments, though.
Like emails. Emails.
Thought experiments, yeah, that's what their model exists in a thought experiment.
Yeah, but it is that, because they always say, well, it works in the calculations.
They just math something into existence to support their just so story.
Talking as massing things into existence. Any evidence of a self-perpetuating molten iron core at the centre of a presupposed spherical Earth?
No, we use diagrams to bring these into existence, Nathan. They're called P waves and S waves, and we represent them with a child's school book diagram. And from there, you can imagine the shape of the Earth, and they're only possible if the Earth's a sphere.
Any evidence of the R value, Earth radius?
The R been here.
I think the R value is the best example of just calculating something into existence, because like you can calculate the radius, or you can measure the radius of a pizza from the center to the outside, the rim, and then you can then just apply a 3 dimensions to it and just think that that pizza then becomes a football, and that's perfectly acceptable if you're a blurther.
This is a pretty fundamental part of the religious assertion that we have a sphere beneath our feet. The R value.
Oh yes.
Anybody?
All stems in the math.
There's
Math, you can make anything into a sphere.
there's a lot of ratios, but it doesn't make it reality.
Got a fair bit of Discord participation. I would like to linger on this a little bit. Any evidence of the R value?
Do you remember Mick West admitting that they just assume R?
Yeah, that wasn't enough. We had to assume it in modus tollens.
Nathan, it's very simple. How do you prove an R value? You take a length of something, then you tie both ends of those lengths, and then you got your R value. It's very easy.
No idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, you do. You just take a piece of paper. It has a length, right? You tie one end to the other. You connect them, and it's going to be into a circle. So then you have the radius. It's such a simple trick.
Saying take a 2D piece of paper and turn it into a tube.
Right.
That's wonderful.
Now you have a radius.
Thank you so much. So, just to dwell on what Anthony said. Yes, that's correct, Anthony. Mick West admitted that we only assume the R value. It's already figured out. But at the time, it seemed like a great victory, other than the response being, well, we already know we're on a sphere. In other words, their justification for us pointing out, hang on a second, this is a begging the question fallacy. You're automatically assuming the thing that you're trying to prove in this calculation you call Earth curve maths. Well, if you've already got the R value, how is this in any way, shape or form a proof? It's not, you're just begging the question. And their answer, well, we already know it's a sphere. So we had to then take it one step further and say, okay, based on your already knowing you're begging the question fallacy is correct, let's put it to the test based on the physicality you must have if that's the case. And it doesn't work. Black swan. If the Earth is a sphere with a radius of 3959, then every distance to horizon, that would be a physical geometric sphere edge horizon, an obstruction claimed to block boats and buildings into the distance, can be no more than 1.2 times the square root of the observer's height in feet. And if it's beyond that, it's not a physical geometric sphere edge anymore. And that's why we have the rebuttals that we were discussing earlier, which is to say we wouldn't expect to see a geometric sphere edge. Well, that's Earth curve. Bye-bye globe model, bye-bye R value, bye-bye all things sphere-shaped. Nothing beneath your feet is sphere-shaped. We're on a flat plane.
Hello, Nathan.
Hello.
Can I ask you a question?
Gushkan, go ahead.
About lunar eclipses.
What's your claim?
For example, in lunar eclipses, you can see the shadow of the Earth on the moon.
How do you know it's a
So it's
shadow?
round.
That's me in the background with my hands up into
the shadow
a
of the
projector.
How do you know it's a shadow?
Because it's not a lunar face. We know it's an object. We can
How do we know
observe
it's an
the
object?
shadow,
How do we know
going
that?
across the
How do we
moon.
know that? Making quite a few assumptions. How do we know that?
I'm using my eyes. Seeing the shadow going across the moon, and it has
Sorry,
to be
don't
an
just
object,
assume it's a shadow.
which
Tell
is
me how you
between
know
the
it's a
sun
shadow.
and the moon.
Stop. Every time I raise a question with something that you're asserting, so far we've assumed it's a shadow, and I'm asking how you've come to that conclusion. And you've said, I've used my eyes. So you've looked at it and decided it's a shadow then. That's not good enough.
No, the other possibility is that it's being created by the moon, and that's very unlikely. So I'm saying it's a shadow.
And you've disproved that. How?
First of all, it's possible to calculate the radius of that shadow.
Sorry, how do you know it's a
And
shadow?
it is approximately
Sorry, guys in
4,200
Discord. Sorry,
kilometers.
just a second. Please, can we not have this conversation like yesterday? Constantly interrupted. Please. Please. We're back to assuming it's a shadow that you're now calculating a radius for? Sorry, how do you know it's a shadow? You haven't answered that yet. We need to get that first.
Because we can predict when these lunar eclipse is going to happen based on the location of the Earth and the Sun. And it matches perfectly because the Earth is between the Sun and the Moon.
That's an assumption.
And that's the
Sorry,
shadow.
that's another assumption. So far, your example is starting with, this is a shadow, and you know why it's a shadow? Because Earth's getting between it, in a heliocentric orbital model. No. None of those things are true.
Are you honestly trying to ask me what a shadow is, how I can prove something is a shadow?
How do you know it's a shadow?
So if you look at a tree, you see... So you look
How
at a
do
tree
you know it's a
and
shadow?
you look, down and you see a shadow.
Excuse me. I ask, how do you know it's a shadow? You said, well, it could be the moon doing it, but it's unlikely. How have you disproved that? Well, I've looked and decided it's orbital mechanics and Earth's causing a shadow. No, you're begging the question. You're assuming orbits and you're assuming Earth's causing a shadow. You haven't proven these things. You're just assuming them in your example. Do you understand? Or are you just going to tell me how you're going to assume it again? 50,000 times like the other.
First of all, we have predictions and calculations.
Yeah, you
for
told me
the
that.
eclipses.
Yeah, you know when this phenomena will occur. Yeah, that's fascinating. So you can predict things like watching a clock hand go round and decide that when it gets to that particular point, it's going to get to 1 o'clock again. Well, that's fascinating. It doesn't prove that this is a shadow. You haven't proven that. You've assumed it based on you knowing when it's going to come next.
Okay, I'm confused. You're trying to get me to prove that it's a shadow.
Are you thick or deaf? I ask, what is it now, the 5th time? How do you know it's a shadow and you need to reiterate my question back to you? Are you dumb or deaf? Yes. How do you know it's a shadow?
No,
I'm
I'm just trying to...
I'll start carrying them off, Dumbo. Yes, that's correct. We're trying to ascertain how you have come to this conclusion, and I'll tell you, it is merely your assumption.
Well...
Cast from one sphere against another sphere, landing a shadow on another sphere, but you're taking all of this setup for granted without any physical evidence.
Then how do you get a selenium? How do you get a selenium then? Yeah.
How do you know it's a
Hang
shadow?
on, how does he know it's a shadow?
He doesn't. It's merely his assumption based on orbital mechanics.
Just get him to say, if you don't know, mate, just say, I don't know.
Honestly, I don't want to talk about this topic if it goes that far.
Goes that far? What, beyond your assumption? Oh, that far? No, I'm not going to discuss this if you're not going to automatically accept everything I assume. Not only have you got the assumption that it's a shadow, you've already got the cause in your assumptive statements that we've got orbital mechanics and Earth causing this shadow. You've got the cause, you've got the effect, you know all about what the phenomena is, you know what's caused it, all based on your assumption of heliocentric orbital mechanics. Now what, you're not going to go further than your assumption,
Nathan.
you bloody zealot?
No, we know that the sun is on the other side.
Don't beg the question, you stupid dick. Don't tell me what you know. This is orbital mechanics. You're about to assert heliocentric model. We know the sun's this and that and the other. No, you do not.
Of course we know it.
You bloody fundy zealot.
Because it's nighttime.
And that means orbital mechanics, does it?
It means you're basically asking me, can you prove that the shadow of the tree isn't shadow?
No, the sun and moon and Earth between it isn't a tree. No, a tree I can go up and touch. It's tangible.
I don't think he understands why you're asking about the shadow. He seems to confuse. Do you want to explain why you're asking the shadow question, Nathan?
Just want to know why he's assumed this.
Because we know, orbital mechanics, like I said. The sun is...
Oh, so because of what I've stated then, because of orbital mechanics being assumed exactly as I've stated, he's now going to say, well, I'm now going to use that that's already been taken to pieces by my opponent as my justification. So because orbital mechanics, your assumption that things move in orbital motions, yeah, we know. I pointed that out. I know what you're assuming.
How did he validate orbital mechanics? How did he go through that?
He
Why is that true?
doesn't. Merely an assumption. Based on an R value. Based on quite a few assumptions. The distances, for example, based on the R assumption for Earth, transposed onto Venus. Yeah, those are all assumptions too. Part of your orbital mechanics assumption. Cat got your tongue?
I think this guy can't even step away from just looking at things in his mind concerning the world and the moon and the stars as balls. I don't think he can even engage in thinking about it in a different way.
That's right.
I
And he
don't think
can't,
he has
he
that
can't,
ability just
and
yet.
can't comprehend that someone else might be able to work beyond his assumption. And he'll even declare it. Well, if you can't work beyond my automatic assumption that I know exactly how this is working with my assumption of orbital mechanics and shadows and Earth getting in between with these non-tangible objects in the sky, well, if you won't assume any of those things alongside me, then I'm not going to play. Right?
But even geometrically, it doesn't work because observably not the case. So, I mean,
I'd like to know what his excuses for the is it the Selenian, however you pronounce it, eclipse, where you get the eclipse claim. Yeah, you get the eclipse claim, but the sun and the moon are both in the sky at the same time, so one's not occulting the other, but they claim it anyway.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Even call the impossible eclipse in their own model, which is cute because there it is.
Just like the orbit of Mercury is impossible.
Refraction.
Hold on, let's just see if he's got a response to that. So you're being challenged by the people on the panel in regards to the Selenian in the heliocentric model not being possible, even defined as the impossible eclipse in the model. Any explanation for that?
It's pretty hard to explain, but of course. Basically, the sun and the moon appear to be both above the horizon, and wait, I need a picture of it. I'm gonna post it in chat.
So not a shadow then.
1 second.
So not a shadow in this orbital assumption then.
It is a shadow of the Earth.
But the Earth's not in the way though, is it? They're both above the horizon. Don't you understand how orbital mechanics work? One would have to be behind the other. And they're not if they're both above the horizon now, are they? So not a shadow then. Maybe some balls required. Some humility. So, we'll try once more. So definitely not a shadow then. Maybe a prolonged silence.
Basically, the light source is below, so the sun shines below the Earth and casts the shadow. Wait, I don't have a globus here right now.
Sorry, your mumblings aren't conceding that if they're both above the horizon, we definitely don't have a shadow.
No, I'm thinking.
I don't need you to think. I need you to accept that this doesn't work. It's even described and defined as the impossible eclipse in your own model. You could just accept the title in your own model, which is the word impossible, and say, yeah, it's impossible. And that would make the shadow claim nonsense, because you wouldn't have impossibilities if it was your shadow. It'd just be blocking the light, wouldn't it? You wouldn't have these circumstances where occasionally it's not blocking the light, it just happens anyway, making it not a shadow. 6th time I've asked you to just concede your point based on the Selenian.
Nathan, could terrestrial refraction...
No, I even tested out...
Arwin's trying to help you out, bless him. Maybe listen to Arwin. Arwin knows his arguments better than you do.
Wait.
You might want to listen to Arwin, he's trying to help you out.
Arwin, don't do it, please.
No, let him. I love Arwin. Arwin, how dare you? Arwin is ace. Don't stop him. Go ahead, Arwin.
I said maybe it could be because of terrestrial refraction that the Selenian happens, because light can bend beyond curves and all that. So maybe light just took a corner.
The shadows bend. Hold on, the shadows bend at the rate of R then.
But Owen, they got a problem even based on that. The degrees don't line up.
Hold on, I'm asking Arwin. Did shadows bend at 7/6R or whatever derivative rate you want to apply in this circumstance?
Well,
The shadows do that too,
it's not
then.
the shadows that
The
bend,
absence
it's
of
the
light bends around a
that
sphere, does
make
it?
the shadow stand out. So it's the light rays around the shadow that have been bent, causing the shadow to appear where it would, right?
No, you need
And
an R value.
everything in the
So
sky
let me
is
get it
not
right.
where it is anyway. Terrestrial refraction is bending the whole thing all over the place. So
Let me get it
even
straight.
if it visually, angular wise, would not line up, don't worry about it because it's
But
not actually
did he-
there. It's in another spot due to terrestrial refraction. So
Thank
just
you, Arwin.
assuming that what you see can
But-
geometrically line up, that's actually a misassumption.
Give him too big a build-up, Elijah, so I wound him up a little too tight. Go ahead, Elijah. Thank you, Arwin.
Sorry.
Did he? I'm sorry, because I stepped away. But did he say refraction?
No, he's being led by Arwin to assume the Earth is a
Oh, okay,
sphere,
okay.
assume Venus is the same size as Earth, and when that assumption fails, use the same assumption of an R-based refraction value to bend light and shadows to make it work again.
Right. A paradox is
Well,
better than a
well,
dead
but-
end, no?
But they only say in terms of refraction that it would be 0.06 degrees refracted, and that's not what we see either. Like it's way higher in the sky.
Sorry, that
than
percentage.
0.06 degrees.
You're giving a percentage based on the rate it bends the light around a sphere on a sphere model, though, aren't you? That's the differential percentage that you're giving, aren't you?
And that is true.
Well, that would mean that you're taking an R value that you assume Earth has with a physical geometric sphere edge horizon to derive the R, transposing it onto Venus, using Kepler's third law of interplanetary motion, deriving all the orbital mechanics, and when it fails, using the R value assumed in the model that failed to bend the light at the rate of the R value and the shadow. I want you to repeat, if you can remember, what you just said, because it was epic and it was rumpus a little bit. Could you just repeat your last statement?
Yeah, sure, that's no problem. Look, if something geometrically doesn't line up in the heavens, you can just simply assume that it's not really there anyway. It just appears to be there because terrestrial refraction is bending all these things so far away dramatically, as it is bending the horizon into making it look like a flat plane. So if it's doing all that, then it can just as well result in that the celestial bodies don't really line up. They might sometimes line up, right, in a geometrical sense, but it's actually not all really where you think it is.
No, nothing.
Right?
But that wasn't the bit I wanted you to repeat. You said a paradox is better than a dead end.
Oh, right. Yes. Right.
Yeah,
The
it
thing
doesn't
is
matter
that
that
a paradox is a dead end,
Yeah.
but at least it's a more complicated dead end.
Exactly. So at the end of this dead end, you've still got the R value required that can't be attained to move the shadow with the rate of R that can't be attained. Well, as Arwin says, a paradox is better than a dead end, isn't it? Last but by no means least, any evidence that you can have gas pressure without the necessary antecedent of a container to press upon.
Can I just ask what was his answer to the question about the Selenian eclipse? What was his answer?
There's no answer. You want to go round in circles with him for 20 minutes?
I just wanted to know, did he answer it?
I'll answer it. You've told him it's the impossible eclipse. How are you going to explain that?
I just wanted to know what his answer was, that's all. We know it's the impossible, but I wanted to know what he thought it was.
Sam, did you have anything further to add in regards to the Selenian?
Sorry for...
Am I being asked?
Okay. That's fine.
Not even curious as to why they call something that actually happens impossible.
Impossible on the model, not impossible.
Exactly.
But I thought everything on their model works. Everything is explained in detail.
It's 100% perfect, the heliocentric model, except when it isn't.
And then they just call it what do they call it? What's the word they use when they call it? There's a word they use when they say something when something doesn't match.
Question, how does it work on your model?
Models are pseudoscience. We don't live on a model. I thought that was made clear. For example,
How
if
it
you
works
assume
in my
R
mod-
and you assume that you've got Venus the same size as Earth, and then you have to move shadows and light around at the rate of the hour that you can't attain, it's because it's a model. And the reason it doesn't work in reality, same with things like Coriolis deviation. You know, it might work in geometry, but that isn't the world. Physical nature isn't the same as mathematics. We don't live on a model. Model's pseudoscience.
Right.
When you go outside and you see an eclipse, are you seeing that in a model?
In an impossible situation on a heliocentric model, we don't stand on, Chocolate.
Yeah.
He thinks he
See, I
does.
don't live in a model. When I
No,
go
I don't
outside,
either.
it's not model. When I'm at work right now, I don't work at a job that's a model. Right? We're talking about the real world, not models.
Can you
When
just
you ask how does it work on your model? No. It just works when you go outside, guy. That's it.
Can you just
Damn,
repeat?
I
Hold on.
thought your
I
concept,
just want chocolate. I just want chocolate. Just 1 second. Can you just repeat the George Musa quote again that Anthony Riley asked you to say earlier?
Yeah, we can, we do, we must consider Newtonian gravity as a force. It doesn't mean it really is one, but we don't necessarily have to work at the really is level.
And with that, I'll say if you are watching this on either Nathan Oakley 1980 or Nathan Oakley Premiering streams, then stay tuned as there will be an aftertaste to follow. Unfortunately, if you're watching this live, this is where we bid you farewell. A huge, massive, enormous thank you to all of you who joined as a Nathan Oakley 1980 channel member, smashed the super chat, subscribed, and all that good stuff. I've been Nathan Oakley. Stay tuned if you're watching on either Premiering stream, and I'll see you all in the next video. Shout out to Rhett Priestley for hitting the super chat. While we're still live, I woke from a dream, saw the moon through the window, and here I am. Massive shout out to Rhett Priestley for hitting the super chat.